Welcome back to the channel. I'm Cesare and here we go. Alright, so let's get going and get some drawing done today. How do I get started with these type of drawings? Well, it's pretty much putting a line down and then seeing where the next one takes me. It's not like other type of drawings where you start with a full blown out idea and you do concept sketches and then you just refine the drawing. In this case, I'm just letting myself draw. I enjoyed the process of letting the drawing dictates where it wants to go. There's a sense of discovery that happens, and that is just fantastic. You literally see magic happen before your eyes when there didn't used to be a line or an image there, and all of a sudden it's there. I often find myself starting a drawing by simply putting a circle down. Just the idea of putting a head down, or just because the circle is a soft form, having a round form a lot of the times keeps me from creating something that is rigid. And once that I start having a somewhat of a character that comes out, like in this case I started with the ghost on the left, I started having an idea of what about if somebody was peeking underneath its sheet. That would be kind of like a silly idea. And what if that somebody is a skeleton? I start by putting down a circle for the head, and the idea kind of popped in. Then out comes the book, and you start looking at exactly how the skeleton is, all the bits and pieces that are necessary to make the drawing work. Fortunately, I do have the Artistic Anatomy by Paul Richet, which is an excellent book. Any artist who does figurative drawing should probably have a copy of that. And taking it out and referencing and seeing how things go together. There's always the fact that the more you draw something, the better you remember it. But there's also something to take in consideration is just because you know how to draw something today doesn't mean that you're going to remember it tomorrow. Memory is an elastic thing, and remembering everything is practically impossible. Plus, as one gets older, things come in and out of your head. And skeleton is something that I haven't drawn in a while. So it was good to go back to doing a little bit of study about the skeleton. It was really refreshing, and plus the second time around, or the third time around, or the fourth time around, you get to discover something that you're finally ready to understand better. Maybe you had done some studies prior for an animal, and then all of a sudden, because you did those studies on the animal, you understand how the pelvis and the femur and the phalanges work, or how they transfer to an animal. Knowing something doesn't necessarily mean that you understand it, and it's important to put all these little bits of knowledge that one has and get to the point of putting them together so that you fully understand how things work, how one helps the other, and then being able to jump from point A to point B without even realizing that this is a possibility, because you had this creative moment and you're able to put these two pieces together. And this applies not just to drawing, but to anything else. In this case, understanding the mechanics of how the skeleton works then helps you being able to be flexible and transfer that understanding to other forms or other characters that you might be drawing. Now, one of the other things that I love to do is to just simply just put down lines, even though you might not really know where you're going. What happens all of a sudden is that the lines kind of start overlapping, and your fantasy and your imagination starts taking over, and then you do start seeing things, and then you're ready to put down a second line and a third line and a fourth line, which are then leading you to a character or a scene or something that tells a story. I often find myself drawing and redrawing the characters, looking for a better solution, or looking for the character in itself that sometimes that just doesn't want to come out. But there's nothing wrong with erasing. It's a process, and in some cases there's something quite interesting that happens on the paper where there's all these eraser marks. I used to hate it, but now I find it really rather nice, because all of a sudden the drawing itself starts coming alive, because whoever is looking at the drawing, or in my case, when I'm looking at the drawing, I see that there was a research that took place, and then there is intent in the line that has a specific purpose, and that really makes a difference. I think that's when there is something that starts coming alive with the drawing. Why do I erase the drawing? Well, it's always a critical moment when you get to erase the drawing, like I did just there. But there is a reason. One thing is never to get too attached to the drawing. That's one thing that is absolutely essential while doing this type of work. But primarily the reason why I do end up deleting the erasing, not deleting, erasing the drawing, is because the graphite itself leaves a slick film, and if I go back on it with just a pen in itself, the ink starts sliding on top of it, and it becomes really hard to make the mark on the paper. And this happens to whichever ink I've used. If anybody has a suggestion of what type of ink to use that would actually bind on top of the graphite, please do let me know. I'd love to give it a try. This process allows you for two separate things. One, it gets rid of the graphite so you can draw, and two, this process forces you to redraw the drawing rather than trace the drawing. Tracing the drawing is absolutely a deadly thing that happens to everybody who's really not too skilled in terms of drawing. And even the best of us find ourselves stuck with dealing with this. It's keeping a drawing alive. It's really not an easy thing to do. There's a lot of stages to a drawing. Unless you're a master who's able to just come out with the image right off the top of your head, you tend to redraw the same drawing multiple times in order to be able to get that one image that you're aiming for, or something close to what you're hoping to achieve. And this is a process that allows you to have a guideline underneath, and then you start building on top of it, and you can't be precious about the line that you're putting down, because it's a fresh line. You're not tracing it anymore, and you're using a different medium. The pen works completely different from a pencil, and that allows you to just let go of it. Now there is other things that start being issues or challenges, I should say, with this process, and that is that you gotta be careful about smudges. Ink is doesn't matter how fast it dries, there's always one or two times where a smudge comes in. But then you have the opportunity of creating something new. I tend to, when there are smudges, to start incorporating something else into the drawing that can allow me to use the smudge to my advantage. A lot of the times I tend to put like little flies that fly around, or I tend to build a different element on top of the form that was presently there. It's just another opportunity to exercise your mind in terms of creativity. Cross-hatching? Oh, cross-hatching is a beast. It's something that I'm still working on, but I'm starting to get a little bit better at it. And it takes practice to be able to do the lines at a specific distance from each other, to be able to have a pleasant flow of lines. I mean, after all, drawing is something that you truly never master. You might get close to it, but even the masters always say it's something that it's a lifetime of exercise. Drawing is exercise. It's discovery, and you can never stop discovering. There's just way too much to learn. So it's the process of learning, and as you're learning about the thing that you're drawing, you're also learning about the tool. You're learning about the experience of drawing it, and by drawing, you're understanding how the form works and how things are put together. Why am I not doing these drawings in digital? Well, we live in a digital age. I've been drawing digitally for a long time, and I figured that it's about time to go back to the roots and learn to make less mistakes. The digital medium allows you to make a lot of changes on the fly. The Command-Z, it's a bit of a crutch, and as you're working for large projects, it's a great tool to have handy, but it's even a greater tool to be able not to use it. And working on paper allows you to get better at not using Command-Z. There has been times when I was working digitally for an extensive amount of time, and then I would pick up a pencil and I would find myself literally reaching out on the paper and trying to press the Command-Z to undo the mark that I just did. And that's really not ideal. That means that as you're drawing, you're not really thinking about the mark that you're making, and you should really be conscious about the mark that you're making, where you're starting the mark and where you're ending the mark, and how much pressure you're putting on it, and specifically what's the meaning of each mark that you're putting down. After all, a line has a shape, has a form, has value, and they all come together to make an image. As an artist, you really should be conscious about the mark that you're making and what it means. I feel like I'm barely getting familiar with markers. I had studied industrial design for a couple of years before changing over to fine arts, and I still have some of the markers from back when I was studying, and I'm surprised that they still work. But it's putting down color feels almost, or at least it used to feel a lot more tedious. Now I'm starting to get a little bit more fluid about it. Maybe it's just because I started doing it a little bit more, and they are no longer school projects but more personal projects. And I'm also letting myself go. If something doesn't work, I'll definitely try to fix it with different passes, or try to think about it creatively, how I could solve that problem. If anybody has seen one of the longer ASMR videos that I've done, you can definitely see that when there's a problem, I tend to often stare at the paper or give it a big sigh, trying to figure out, okay, well, how am I gonna solve this problem? As I do more of these drawings, it's becoming a lot more second nature for me to be able to pick a color and to be able to fill the form. And I try to think of it not as putting color in a shape, but more like painting the form, or at least giving it a texture. And one of the things that I really like about in the past years, and I think this is one of the reasons why I ended up picking up the markers again, is the new brush tips that came on the market, which allow for a much more fluid laying down of the color, and they do feel a lot more like watercolors. And one of the things that I appreciate about the use of the animation paper is a vellum, and as such it allows you to being able to layer the color on without it permeating to the lower pages. I tend to work with multiple pages, one on top of the other, rather than just directly on a solid surface. That way there is a little bit of give both from the pen as well as from the pencil. Allows you for creating a much softer line on the paper. Anyways, the paper itself, because it can handle a lot more than regular bond paper or even the designer's paper, at least for me, from my past experience, it allows for different iterations and allow for multiple passes of color that can be laid on it, and it can definitely take quite a bit of abuse. The first pass is usually foundation color. I tend to start with a lighter color and then work darker. I think of these passes as practically glazing the color on top of it, not necessarily just putting the strokes on top. Sometimes I tend to go quite heavy, like in this case, so it's no longer just a glaze, but literally putting the blob of paint on top of the other. And once I start putting the second passes of color on top of a shape, then I start going back and forth between the pen and the brush, because I want to be able to bring the drawing up into a full form cohesively. Just like the under drawing or the red pencil drawing is informing the line work, the marker work is informing the line, and back and forth. Even the red line underneath, it's still part of the final drawing, and I do refer to it most of the times for additional elements that I might be adding to it. There are times, obviously, that I might go back and try to hide some of the red line work, or simply just leave it as part of the process, because the process is great to be able to see. I mean, I find that's probably one of the reasons why I like drawing so much. Drawing is practically one of the first way or easiest way to create something. Literally all you need to be able to do is put a mark on a piece of paper. You can draw in the sand. It's really quite a direct way of being creative. Each element of this process informs the next, and it's, as a creative person, being able to see the process that somebody goes through, it's invigorating, because then you kind of get to see behind the scenes of the thinking to be able to make an image. One of the things that I've been experimenting with lately is actually how far can I push myself with the drawing, specifically because of being able to say, okay, the drawing is done. It's quite easy to stop too early with the drawing, and it's really sad when you end up pushing the drawing just a little bit too far and you start messing it up. So you need to be able to find a happy medium of it to be able to say, yes, that is just as far as it needs to go. And the more you do, the more you get familiar with, but you also need to be familiar with the tool. And in this case, as I'm getting more and more familiar with the markers and also with the different line weights that I'm trying to experiment with, and the type of marks that I'm trying to put down in terms of thicknesses, and can the pen turn on a sharp corner quite easily with the way I throw the pen, or I should say the way I throw the line, or not. These are all things that you need to get more and more familiar with in terms of your tools. And as I've been experimenting with different tools and getting more familiar with them, I am also seeing, okay, well, can I do this with this tool? Can I not do that with that tool? A weird thing that will always happen is that in the moment that you're making an image, you start thinking, oh, I just screwed this up. And then you kind of say, okay, well, there's going to be another drawing. Let's see if I can kind of move along. And one of the good things when you think that you actually screwed up the drawing is that you kind of let go of these preconceived ideas that you need to make every time a perfect drawing. And then all of a sudden you start realizing, after all, it's not that bad of a drawing. But you can only truly judge that afterward. Sometimes it takes you 6 months. Sometimes it takes you somebody else that looks at it. Sometimes you might even pick up the drawing years later and say, did I draw this? And those are great moments when you can objectively actually judge your own work and realize, okay, I guess I am not a hack. There's plenty more that I need to learn, but you know what? This one kind of came out okay, or at least I learned something from it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this drawing, and if you'd like to see more of these, please subscribe so that I know that I should be making more of these and share them with you.